There is a mansion in America, so vast, so carefully constructed, so impossibly grand, that its owner believed it would outlive every sorrow his family ever faced. But instead, it became the most haunting symbol of everything he tried to escape. This is the story of Lynnewood Hall, a palace built from unimaginable wealth and undone by secrets that were never meant to be spoken. For more than a century, rumors have swirled around this forgotten Gilded Age masterpiece. Whispers of hidden rooms sealed before the mansion even opened. Whispers of priceless art that vanished without explanation. Whispers of a family torn apart by grief, so deep it bent the trajectory of an empire. And for decades, the truth remained locked behind silence, protected by institutions, guarded by privilege, lost in the spaces where history prefers to look away. Today, we pull back that silence. In this documentary, you will hear the story the records do not tell, how one of America's wealthiest families rose with breathtaking force, and how their legacy crumbled under pressures no fortune could contain. You will follow the trail of missing masterpieces, the hidden chambers buried inside the mansion's walls, the decisions that fractured a dynasty, and the quiet reckoning that arrived far too late. By the end, one question will follow you long after the final words fade. How does the grandest house in America become the most forgotten? And what truth was Lynnewood Hall built to hide? Chapter 1. The Echo of an Empty Mansion. There are places in this country where history whispers, but Lynnewood Hall does something different. It listens, and when a place listens long enough, it begins to remember everything we try to forget. Some say the mansion feels empty, but the truth is far stranger. It feels aware, not because of what stands there now, but because of what once lived inside its walls. Ambition, grief, pride, and a silence thick enough to swallow entire lifetimes. Before Lynnewood Hall became a ruin in the public imagination, it was something else entirely. It was a promise, and then a warning. But to understand why this mansion became one of America's darkest legacies, we have to start not with its architecture, nor its parties, nor the fortune that created it, but with a feeling that something was always slightly wrong. Because Lynnewood Hall wasn't merely built, it was willed into existence by a man determined to outrun the past. And the past followed him anyway. But that's getting ahead of the story. Before the first stone was laid, before the first echo filled its halls, the Widener family carried a quiet heaviness, one that would one day shape the fate of their empire. Yet, the mansion didn't begin as a symbol of tragedy. It began as a monument to triumph. At the turn of the 20th century, Peter A. B. Widener was a name spoken with the same careful respect reserved for titans. He embodied the Gilded Age dream steel: railroads, streetcars, industries rising from soot and sweat. But when a man climbs that high, he rarely sees the shadows gathering beneath him. And Widener, for all his brilliance, rarely looked down. People said he had the kind of presence that filled a room before he entered it. But those who knew him more intimately whispered something else, that he carried an inner distance, as if part of him never fully stepped into the room at all. This distance grew from a truth he seldom admitted. His fortune did not bring peace. It brought responsibility, expectation, and an almost crushing solitude. The kind that wealth can disguise, but never truly dissolve. And so Lynnewood Hall was imagined not as a retreat, nor even as a home, but as a fortress against mortality, a place designed to outlive him, a stone declaration that his name would never fade, even if the man himself eventually would. But here lies the twist that early visitors sensed and rarely spoke aloud. The house felt older than the man who built it, as if it had been waiting for him. Every great fortune carries a cost, and sometimes that cost is measured not in dollars, but in silence, long, heavy, unbroken silence. Widener's contemporaries saw the mansion as a monument to American greatness, but to those who stepped inside after dark, it felt like something else entirely. A vast, listening chamber where the slightest sound seemed to travel too far, echo too long, linger too heavily. Some claimed the mansion never slept. Others swore that when they spoke, their words didn't merely bounce back, they felt received. But at this point in the story, Lynnewood Hall wasn't haunted by rumors or neglect. It was haunted by anticipation, because Widener was building more than rooms and corridors. He was building a legacy he hoped would redeem everything. He could not control the fragility of life, the unpredictability of fate, the sense that greatness slips through human hands far more easily than anyone admits. And perhaps he sensed what was coming. He had already endured loss so deep it left seams in his spirit. Loss that shaped every decision he made afterward. Loss that whispered to him, even in moments of triumph, that nothing gold truly stays. This is where Lynnewood Hall becomes more than an estate. It becomes a character, a witness, a reservoir of every unspoken fear that accompanied the Wideners through their climb to the top. One family friend once remarked privately, never publicly, that the mansion felt like a cathedral designed for someone who feared God might not be watching. Another observed that Widener seemed less proud of the home than protective of it, as if guarding something fragile, hidden beneath its grandeur. And then came the decision that would shape everything. A decision Widener made in a moment of certainty, perhaps even desperation. A decision he believed would secure his family's place in history. But that belief would prove disastrously wrong, because Lynnewood Hall, for all its brilliance, was built upon a contradiction no architect could resolve. That wealth can build almost anything except the future one hopes for. As the final plans were drawn, as materials were ordered, as artisans were hired from across the world, something shifted in the Widener household. A subtle tension, a new distance between family members. A sense that the mansion was becoming not a gathering place, but a dividing line. Widener pressed forward anyway. The world saw confidence. His family felt urgency. But within Widener himself, a quiet unease grew, a feeling that building something so vast, so permanent, was an act of defiance against forces he couldn't quite name. And forces like that do not enjoy being challenged. People later claimed that the mansion absorbed the emotions of the people inside it, that it felt heavy with ambition, then heavy with grief, then heavy with something even harder to define. Maybe they were right, because even before the mansion's doors opened for the first time, the seeds of its downfall had already been planted. Not in its design, not in its scale, but in the hearts of the very people it was meant to protect. And so Lynnewood Hall rose grand, immense, undeniable, yet shadowed by the very human fragilities its owner hoped it would silence. We begin with the echo of an empty mansion, because that echo carries every secret we're about to uncover. But before those secrets unfold, before tragedy intertwines with legacy, and before Lynnewood Hall earns its reputation as one of America's great forgotten masterpieces, something crucial must be understood. The mansion's story did not truly begin when construction started. It began the moment Peter A.B. Widener made a choice that would shape the destiny of his family, his fortune, and the great house that would one day stand abandoned, filled not with voices but with memory. And that choice is where everything began to go wrong. Chapter 2. The Making of a Titan. Before Lynnewood Hall became the monument of a powerful dynasty, there was simply a boy. A boy born into modest circumstances, far from marble halls and gilded staircases. A boy named Peter Arell Brown Widener. It is easy to speak of magnates as if they were forged, fully formed, men of steel and certainty from the moment they first drew breath. But Widener's rise came from something far more complicated than ambition alone. It came from a restless hunger, one that began long before he made his first fortune. He grew up in a Philadelphia that was raw and unpredictable, a city where opportunity arrived hand in hand with danger. The streets were loud, crowded, full of the clatter and grind of an America forcing itself into the industrial age. Peter learned early that no one was coming to save him. Survival meant adaptation. Adaptation meant instinct. And instinct soon became the compass that guided him into a world where fortunes were made quickly and lost even faster. Yet, even as a young man, he carried an unusual quietness. Not timidity, something sharper. A reflective stillness, as though he observed everything and everyone before stepping forward. People who knew him later in life would say he had a way of reading a room without appearing to look at anyone at all. That trait began here, in the chaos of his early years, where watching carefully could mean the difference between poverty and possibility. His first ascent came not from grand innovation, but from understanding people what they feared, what they wanted, and what they would pay for. During the Civil War, he secured contracts to supply provisions to Union troops, a task that required nerve, calculation, and an unflinching belief that opportunity favored those willing to take risks. Widener took them, and they paid off. But risk alone does not make a titan. There was something else, something deeper: loss. Before he was a baron of industry, before he could afford to commission the most extravagant home in America, Widener suffered a wound that never fully healed. He and his wife, Hannah, endured the death of a child, an event spoken of rarely and only in hushed tones. But in the lives of the powerful, it is often the unspoken sorrows that shape the most visible decisions. Widener did not retreat into grief. He drove forward, further and faster, as if movement itself could erase pain. He built businesses, networks, partnerships. He sensed the nation's shift toward urbanization and placed himself at the center of it. Streetcars, traction systems, rail lines, these became the arteries of America's growing cities, and Widener ensured that every pulse benefited him. His fortune multiplied. His influence expanded. His name gained a weight that few dared challenge. But with every success, the stillness inside him grew heavier. People admired him, feared him, respected him. Very few understood him. Even fewer were allowed close enough to see the cracks beneath the polished surface. And then, one day, he made a decision that startled even his closest confidants. He resolved to build a home, no, not a home, something far larger. Something that would outshine every estate in the country. A place that would embody triumph, control, permanence. Lynnewood Hall. Why? The question lingered even among those who stood firmly at his side. Widener himself seldom offered a clear explanation. Some spoke of his devotion to art, which grew into one of the greatest private collections in American history. Others described his desire to secure his sons' social futures, to carve their place among the elite families of the age. But those who understood him best knew differently. Widener feared time. He feared the randomness of loss. He feared the fragility of the legacy he was building. And so he sought to create something so vast, so solid, so immovable, that not even tragedy could diminish it. At least, that is what he believed. As Widener rose, the emotional landscape of his life shifted in ways that mattered more than he realized. He gained allies who admired his power, but not his heart. He gained rivals who studied him with envy. He gained a reputation that demanded constant reinforcement. Every triumph added another layer to the walls around him. Walls of status, walls of expectation, walls of silence. Yet, if he hoped Lynnewood Hall would bring him peace, he miscalculated. The project awakened something else entirely, a widening divide within his family. His wife, Hannah, was often described as gentle, private, and steady. Her world was one of intimate gatherings, quiet reflection, and the soft rhythms of domestic life. The mansion Widener envisioned was none of these things. It was monumental, imposing, a declaration of power written in stone. As plans expanded, the emotional gap between the couple grew harder to ignore. Widener was carving a future they were meant to share, but one that no longer resembled the life they once imagined together. Their sons, George and Joseph, navigated this new world with caution. They admired their father. They feared him, too. And both recognized that Lynnewood Hall was not just a house, it was a responsibility, a legacy they were expected to uphold. Yet, even here, something unspoken simmered beneath the surface. The Wideners were a family bound together by wealth, but separated by grief. Each carried their own portion of loss. Each bore their own private expectations. And the larger the fortune grew, the more fragile the bonds between them became. Widener's associates noticed subtle shifts as well. He became more guarded, more introspective, more deliberate in every move. He spoke often of the future, rarely of the past. His motivations remained precise, but his emotions grew increasingly difficult to read. And then came the moment that would shape the mansion's destiny. Widener chose the architect. Not the most fashionable architect, not the one with the boldest public acclaim, but the one who seemed capable of understanding the complexity of what he wanted, not merely a structure, but a symbol. Horace Trumbauer, a man as enigmatic in his own way as Widener. Their partnership would produce one of the greatest architectural achievements in American history. But beneath their collaboration was a truth neither ever voiced. Both men were driven by something beyond ambition, something closer to obsession. Widener wanted permanence. Trumbauer wanted legacy. And together, they began creating something that would define them both. Yet, even as the first plans were being drafted, a quiet question emerged, one Widener never fully answered. Was Lynnewood Hall being built for the living or for the dead? Because beneath the grandeur, beneath the ambition, beneath the meticulous calculations of money and influence, one truth remained constant. Widener was a man who had lost. And men who carry loss often build monuments, not to celebrate life, but to guard against the shadow of its absence. This is the foundation upon which Lynnewood Hall truly stands. Not limestone, not marble, but emotion. Hope intertwined with fear. Ambition sharpened by grief. A longing for control in a world that had already shown him how little control any man truly holds. And as construction approached, as plans solidified, as the idea of Lynnewood Hall grew more real, something else began to form alongside it. A story, a destiny, and a secret. One Widener never intended to reveal, but one Lynnewood Hall would remember for him. Chapter 3, A House Built from Restlessness. It is tempting to believe great houses rise from confidence, from certainty, from vision, from the steady hand of a man who knows exactly what he wants. But Lynnewood Hall was not born from certainty. It was born from restlessness, a restlessness that took root in Peter A. B. Widener long before a single blueprint was drawn, long before he met the architect who would translate his unease into stone, long before the mansion gained its reputation as both masterpiece and omen. To understand Lynnewood's creation, we must go inside the mind of a man who had achieved everything the world told him to desire, and found the victory strangely hollow. Widener had built empires, streetcar systems, railroad interests, banks. He had collected art of staggering importance, pieces that museums around the world envied. He had secured wealth so vast that accountants struggled to measure it in simple terms. But what no one could measure was the widening emotional space between what he possessed and what he feared losing. In the private conversations of close associates, a portrait of Widener emerges that differs sharply from the public myth. He could negotiate with terrifying precision, yet hesitate over decisions that should have been simple. He could invest millions without blinking, yet sit awake at night, troubled by memories he never spoke aloud. He carried the air of a man who could command armies of financiers, and yet could not command his own inner quiet. This restlessness became the invisible force that demanded Lynnewood Hall into existence. He did not want a home. He wanted a fortress, a sanctuary against uncertainty, a monument that could not be shaken by grief or time or the sudden cruelty of fate. When he first approached the idea of building a new estate, no one understood the scale he intended. Most assumed he wanted what any wealthy man might: comfort, space, perhaps a few lavish rooms for entertaining. But Widener's ambition was different. He wanted a structure that could hold the weight of everything he carried inside him. He wanted permanence. He wanted silence. He wanted control. And he wanted it so deeply that he found the one man whose architectural genius could make it real. Horace Trumbauer, a man of almost preternatural calm, a draftsman capable of giving form to emotions that clients themselves could not articulate. Trumbauer built for people who were not simply wealthy. He built for people who were trying to outrun something. When Widener and Trumbauer first met, there are no transcripts, no letters, no surviving records describing what they said. And yet, the results speak clearly. The architect understood something essential about his patron. He understood that Lynnewood Hall needed to be vast but contained, grand but disciplined, lavish yet restrained. Most of all, it needed to feel inevitable. As plans evolved, so did Widener's demands. He wanted order. He wanted symmetry. He wanted a structure so large it bordered on myth, but with rooms arranged in a way that suggested a deeper meaning, a deliberate logic known only to him. Some called it obsession. Others called it madness. Trumbauer simply called it instruction. Yet, even as the design grew more elaborate, something curious began happening behind the scenes. Members of the Widener family drifted into discussions with an increasing sense of caution. They worried about costs. They worried about appearances. They worried, most of all, that the project was no longer about building a home, but about answering a question their father could not ask aloud. Who am I, if not the man who built this? This is the quiet truth behind so many monuments. They rise not from confidence, but from fear. Widener feared impermanence. He feared the fragility of legacy. He feared the unpredictable nature of loss, the kind of loss he had already felt and dreaded feeling again. And so Trumbauer's drawings became grander, the spaces more numerous, the scale more unbelievable. But behind every decision, there was always a hint of Widener's private unrest. He insisted on long corridors, rooms connected in ways that seemed designed to echo thoughts rather than footsteps. He wanted ceilings so high that sound dissipated before reaching them. He favored materials that felt unyielding, immovable. It was as if he were designing not a living space, but a psychological refuge, one that could hold his doubts without breaking. But here is the twist that few recognized at the time. A house built to contain restlessness can never truly be at peace. Those closest to him felt the tension growing. Friends whispered that he seemed driven by something he could not control. Family members noticed he became more withdrawn, more contemplative, more preoccupied with questions of continuity and meaning. And somewhere in these conversations, quiet, private, never recorded concerns emerged that Lynnewood Hall was becoming a burden long before it was built. But construction pressed forward, stone by stone, decision by decision, hour by hour. The workers who witnessed the early days of the project often commented on its strange emotional atmosphere. Some said it felt like participating in an undertaking too large to fully comprehend. Others described a sense of urgency, as though the mansion had to rise swiftly, not merely because the plans demanded it, but because something unseen pressed for its completion. Perhaps it was Widener's own urgency. Perhaps it was the whisper of history beginning to lean into the family's story. Perhaps it was simply the inevitability of building something destined to become a legend, for reasons far darker than anyone imagined. And then, just as the project gained unstoppable momentum, the first signs of strain appeared. Quiet disagreements between father and sons, a widening silence between Widener and his wife, concerns about cost, about the direction of the design, about what the mansion represented. But by then, Lynnewood Hall was no longer a concept. It was a force, and forces like that rarely allow themselves to be questioned. Trumbauer continued drafting, Widener continued pushing, and the family continued watching, with admiration, with apprehension, and with a growing sense that something precious was being lost beneath the weight of what was being built. Because the truth was already emerging, quietly and unmistakably. Lynnewood Hall was not designed for the life the Widners were living. It was designed for a life Widener wanted to believe was still possible, a life untouched by sorrow, a life governed by order, a life in which the past could be contained and the future controlled. But houses built from restlessness have a strange way of echoing the very emotions they are meant to silence. And Lynnewood Hall was already beginning to echo. Chapter 4. Voices Behind the Velvet. Before Lynnewood Hall was fully furnished, long before its first guests stepped across its threshold, the Widners had already begun imagining the world it would contain. A world of elegance, a world of prestige, a world where every conversation unfolded like a carefully rehearsed performance. But behind that velvet curtain of sophistication, behind the polished words, the measured laughter, the faultless manners, there existed an entirely different realm. A realm where unspoken grudges simmered, where ambitions clashed, where appearances were maintained at a cost no one dared to acknowledge openly. This is where the true story of the mansion begins to thicken, not in the grandeur of its rooms, but in the hidden conversations that shaped its legacy. High society had rules, unwritten rules, rules enforced not by law, but by silence, by implication, by the slightest shift in tone. At the Widener's level of wealth, every greeting carried weight. Every invitation was a transaction. Every pause in conversation could be interpreted as either offense or opportunity. And within this world, Lynnewood Hall was meant to be the family's crown jewel, a stage upon which the next chapter of their dynasty would unfold. Yet, even in the earliest gatherings, before the mansion reached its full splendor, whispers circulated. Not about the architecture, not about the art, but about the family itself. Some said Peter Widener had become too consumed by the estate. Others claimed he was building something no family could realistically inhabit. A few wondered aloud whether the house was an expression of triumph or a reaction to something far more unsettling. Servants, who heard everything and said nothing, became the true record keepers of this period. While aristocrats concerned themselves with gossip and political marriages, the household staff observed subtler truths, voices lowered in tension, footsteps that betrayed impatience, arguments that dissolved into long, heavy silences. One maid later recalled that Widener walked differently when discussing the mansion, as if he were carrying something fragile and dangerous inside him, a kind of hope sharpened by worry, a kind of pride softened by doubt. His wife, Hannah, remained gracious, warm, and admired by nearly everyone who met her. But even she began to feel the mansion's weight. She sensed that Lynnewood was becoming less a family home and more a monument that demanded constant maintenance, constant presence, constant perfection. Their sons, George and Joseph, navigated these tensions with increasing care. George, intellectual and sensitive, understood the pressures his father carried but struggled with the detachment it required. Joseph, more forceful, more outwardly confident, seemed ready to embrace the responsibilities of legacy. Yet, even he felt the mansion casting a long, anticipatory shadow. As Lynnewood Hall neared completion, invitations went out for the earliest gatherings, private dinners, small receptions, social visits meant to spark curiosity without revealing the full estate. These events were meticulously planned. Guests were selected not for friendship, but for influence. Their reactions mattered. Their approval mattered even more. And on these nights, the mansion's true personality began to emerge. The social world of the Gilded Age had a strange alchemy. Wealth alone wasn't enough. It had to be transformed through charm, through spectacle, through the careful orchestration of conversation into something resembling legitimacy. Widener understood this. He understood that power became brittle unless softened by social acceptance. He understood that reputation was a currency as valuable as money. But what he may not have understood was how quickly this world could turn on itself. At one of the earliest gatherings, a notable guest, respected, influential, accustomed to being heard, made a quiet remark that reached the wrong ears. He suggested, with a hint of amusement, that the Wideners were overreaching, that Lynnewood Hall was a gesture of insecurity, not strength, that true aristocracy needed no such display. The remark lingered in the air long after the guest had moved on. Those who heard it exchanged quick glances. Those who didn't soon sensed a shift in the atmosphere anyway. And from that moment, a subtle fracture began forming in the social perception of the family. The Wideners were admired, yes, respected, undoubtedly. But accepted without question? No longer. High society had ways of testing newcomers, ways of determining whether they belonged or whether they were simply trying too hard to belong. Lynnewood Hall became both symbol and target in that test. Those within the family felt this pressure acutely. Hannah became more withdrawn. George avoided certain gatherings entirely. Joseph, ever loyal to his father's vision, bristled at the insinuations but could do little to silence them. And behind the scenes, the servants began noticing something else. The voices of the family, when they believed themselves unheard, were changing. They became more strained, more clipped, more burdened by expectations. Sometimes, late at night, two members of the household staff swore they heard muffled arguments. Not loud, not explosive, just tense enough to suggest disagreements about the path ahead. But the most telling shift wasn't in the arguments. It was in the silences between them. A silence that grew heavier as the mansion neared completion. A silence that seemed to mirror the echoing halls themselves, large, impressive, and increasingly difficult to fill with genuine warmth. And still, the parties continued. Guests arrived with polished smiles. They offered polite admiration. They complimented Widener's achievements. But beneath the chorus of approval, something unsettling threaded through the evening air. Envy, skepticism, a quiet certainty among some that the fortune behind this estate had been amassed too quickly, too aggressively, too unapologetically. In this world, the Wideners were not merely hosting gatherings. They were being evaluated, and while most of the family sensed the implications, one person reacted more strongly than the rest. George. Gentle, thoughtful George, whose relationship to wealth was far more cautious than celebratory, began withdrawing from social events altogether. He felt the mansion amplifying expectations he wanted nothing to do with. He felt its symbolism tightening around the family like a silent demand for perfection. One evening, after a particularly tense gathering, someone overheard him mutter a sentence that would become strangely prophetic. "This house expects too much of us." The comment spread quietly among the staff, then faded, never reaching Widener's ears. If it had, perhaps the course of the mansion's history would have shifted, but it did not, and the tension only grew. Because the voices behind the velvet, the whispered doubts, the private frustrations, the small resentments were beginning to accumulate. And in a family standing on the precipice of unimaginable tragedy, even small fractures can become fault lines. In the world of the Gilded Age, appearances were everything. Declarations of strength were everything. Reputation was everything. But behind the velvet, the truth was becoming clear. Lynnewood Hall was not strengthening the family. It was testing them, and the test had only just begun. Chapter 5. The Inheritance of Burdens. Legacy, in families like the Wideners, is never just a matter of property. It is an inheritance of expectations, obligations, ambitions, and wounds. And long before Lynnewood Hall became a symbol of decline, it became the battleground for the family's most difficult question. Who would carry the weight of everything Peter A.B. Widener had built? To the outside world, the answer seemed obvious. Widener had two surviving sons, Joseph, the confident heir apparent, and George, the quiet intellectual. But within the family, nothing was that simple. Because legacy is not determined by birth order alone. It is shaped by temperament, by desire, and by fear. As Lynnewood Hall approached its completion, the discussion of succession, who would guide the family fortune, who would oversee the vast art collection, who would manage the estate, moved from whispered speculation to an unavoidable reality. Widener, who outwardly commanded every decision of his empire, rarely spoke of his intentions. He was a man who preferred action to explanation, leaving others to interpret the meaning behind his choices. And this silence created an atmosphere thick with uncertainty. George, always reflective, sensed the storm first. He understood that the mansion was not merely a home. It was a declaration, a message that the Widener name was meant to endure for generations. But he also understood something deeper, something more troubling. He did not want to be the one responsible for carrying that message. George admired his father. He loved him, but he feared the cost of stepping into a role that demanded so much and left so little room for personal peace. His temperament was not suited for battles of influence, not shaped for the harsh negotiations that defined the Widener empire. Joseph, by contrast, seemed born for it. He carried himself with assurance. He spoke with conviction. He moved through rooms as though he already understood the weight of leadership. But confidence does not erase conflict, nor does ambition guarantee unity. Where George saw the mansion as a burden, Joseph saw it as an opportunity, a chance to elevate the family to heights rivaling the great European houses Widener admired. And in that difference, a quiet divide formed between the brothers. Their mother, Hannah, felt it deeply. She observed it not in arguments, but in pauses too long to be comfortable, too careful to be ordinary. She sensed the dread growing in George, the determination hardening in Joseph, and the strain building around her husband as he realized he could not satisfy both. But the true turning point did not come from a conversation within the family. It came from tragedy, a loss that struck so sharply, so unexpectedly, that it fractured the emotional foundation of the Widener household. Their youngest son, Harry, beloved and brilliant, died in an accident prior to the Titanic disaster that would later claim additional members of the extended family. His death was a blow from which Peter Widener never fully recovered. Harry had been the one who bridged the gap between George and Joseph. He had been the son who moved effortlessly between worlds, equally comfortable with books and business, with solitude and society. He was the balance the family didn't realize they depended on until he was gone. With Harry's absence came a void that none of them knew how to fill. And into that void poured everything they had tried so hard to control. Grief, resentment, confusion, fear of the future. Widener withdrew into himself. He threw even more energy into the mansion, even more pressure onto its purpose, even more expectations onto the legacy he hoped to cement. And the question of inheritance became sharper, harder, unavoidable. One evening, behind closed doors, a meeting was held. Present were Widener, George, Joseph, and a family advisor, a man whose counsel was trusted, even if seldom acknowledged publicly. The discussion began formally. It did not stay that way. Joseph argued that he had the temperament and drive necessary to maintain the empire. George countered that the empire did not align with his deepest values. Widener listened, expression unreadable. At some point, voices rose not in anger, but in desperation, each son speaking from a place of truth, each revealing vulnerabilities rarely shown. George admitted he feared the responsibility. Joseph admitted he feared losing his brother's respect. Widener, for the first time, confessed that he feared losing everything he had built to time itself. The advisor, sensing tension thickening in the room, presented options, legal arrangements, financial structures, shared responsibilities. But beneath the surface, the conversation turned spiritual, almost existential. Who are we if the future we inherit is not the future we want? Who are we if the family name becomes heavier than the family itself? And who was Lynnewood Hall truly meant to serve, the living or the memory of the dead? By the end of the meeting, no final decision had been made. The only certainty was that the uncertainty had deepened. Rumors soon circulated among the household staff, not of shouting or conflict, but of a tension so profound it could be felt in the air. The family, for all its wealth, stood on the edge of an emotional precipice, and as if the situation were not fragile enough, a document surfaced, one that would ignite a new chapter of turmoil. A revised will, not finalized, not public, not officially declared, but drafted. A draft that distributed responsibilities in ways that surprised everyone, including the sons themselves. The details were never openly discussed. Not then, not later, but its existence alone created pressure that would haunt the family long after the ink dried. Some believed that the draft was Widener's attempt to balance the needs of his sons. Others believed it was an attempt to force them into unity. Still others whispered that it was Widener's way of controlling the future from beyond his own lifetime. Whatever the truth, one fact became undeniable. The inheritance the Wideners faced was not simply wealth. It was the inheritance of burdens. Burdens of expectation. Burdens of grief. Burdens of decisions made in silence. Lynnewood Hall, once imagined as the solution to the family's fears, was becoming the vessel that held them, and the first cracks in the foundation of their legacy were beginning to spread. Chapter 6. Greatness begins to crumble. Great houses do not fall all at once. They do not collapse in a single dramatic moment, nor do they surrender their grandeur in a single breath. Instead, they begin to fade the way families do, quietly, subtly, through a series of small changes that seem inconsequential, until suddenly they aren't. Lynnewood Hall was no exception. Its decline did not begin with decay, or vandalism, or abandonment. It began with absence. The absence of laughter in rooms designed for celebration. The absence of voices in corridors meant to carry them. The absence of the people for whom the mansion had been built in the first place. The Widener family, shaken by grief and divided by responsibility, no longer moved through their home with ease. Every room reminded them of someone who was no longer there. Every hallway felt slightly larger than before, slightly colder, slightly more hollow. In the emotional aftermath of the tragedies they endured, Lynnewood Hall became less of a refuge and more of a reminder. A reminder of dreams built too high, too quickly, and at a cost none of them had anticipated. Peter Widener, once so deeply invested in the mansion's purpose, found himself withdrawing from the life inside it. He devoted his energy to managing his businesses, adjusting his collections, and protecting the pieces of his legacy he believed could still be controlled. But the household itself, that became a quieter arena. Servants who had once rushed through their tasks with practiced precision now moved more cautiously, as if aware that they were tending to a house in mourning. The kitchen staff whispered that the family rarely dined together anymore. The groundskeepers noted that certain paths on the estate went untouched for weeks. And the housemaids, the ones who saw the most, without appearing to see anything at all, felt the air grow heavier with each passing month. But decline never announces itself. It gathers in small, almost imperceptible ways. A room no longer used, a portrait moved to storage, a door kept closed without explanation. One of the earliest signs came in the handling of the Widener art collection, once the crown jewel of the estate, admired by scholars and coveted by museums. The paintings were cleaned less frequently. The cataloging slowed. Some pieces were quietly moved to other locations, then to private vaults, and eventually to markets far beyond the estate. The family told themselves this was practical, a necessary streamlining, a reasonable step in difficult times. But beneath that reasoning was another truth. Looking at the art had become painful. Each piece carried memories of conversations, gatherings, shared observations, moments that no longer had a place in the mansion's changing life. And so, the collection, once so central to the identity of Lynnewood Hall, began to fragment. The first major sale sparked little public attention. It was discreet, conducted through private intermediaries. A painting here, a sculpture there, a few items transferred quietly to institutions that knew better than to ask too many questions. But those close to the estate noticed something unsettling. Some items being moved were not the ones normally chosen for sale. They were pieces of personal meaning objects with no financial necessity behind their removal. It was as though someone were selectively erasing fragments of the family's past. At this stage, no one suspected foul play. No one imagined intentional disappearance. The family was grieving. Their priorities had shifted. Such explanations seemed perfectly plausible. But as the months passed, subtle discrepancies emerged. An inventory list contained a piece that no longer existed in any room of the mansion. A librarian at the estate noticed that a book known to be part of Harry Widener's cherished collection had vanished without being recorded. A caretaker recalled a crate being removed with unusual secrecy, no destination labeled, no documentation provided. These were not large incidents, not dramatic enough to raise alarms, just small irregularities, fragments of a puzzle no one yet realized they were assembling. Meanwhile, the mansion itself began changing in ways that were harder to ignore. Widener, older and more fragile now, no longer roamed the estate as he once had. His footsteps were fewer, his presence quieter. His influence, once the driving force behind every detail of the mansion's creation, now seemed to fade into the background. Rooms that once buzzed with activity fell silent for days at a time. Certain wings of the estate were rarely visited. Servants began requesting reassignment to smaller, more manageable properties. Some left altogether. Those who stayed noticed the mansion shifting from a place of hosting to a place of waiting. Waiting for purpose, waiting for direction, waiting for a family that no longer knew how to inhabit it. One longtime housemaid, reflecting later, described the estate in a way that captured the transition perfectly. It felt like trying to warm a house that did not want to be warm anymore. And still, the changes continued. Newspapers, which once eagerly reported on every move the Wideners made, began shifting their attention elsewhere. The family remained wealthy, yes. Influential, yes. But no longer ascendant. Their momentum had slowed. Their story had turned inward. The Widener name, once synonymous with expansion, now became associated with maintenance, maintaining investments, maintaining appearances, maintaining a legacy that no longer grew, but had to be preserved. And with preservation came vulnerability. Because when a fortune stops expanding, people begin to examine what's left. They begin to question decisions, motives, transfers, omissions. They begin to hold families to standards their ancestors were never required to meet. This shift in public perception, quiet but unmistakable, marked the beginning of Lynnewood Hall's transformation from symbol of triumph to symbol of fragility. But the most telling shift came from within the family itself. Joseph, now the de facto heir, felt the pressure of maintaining a legacy he had never expected to inherit alone. George, who had long feared the demands of such responsibility, retreated further into private life. Their mother struggled to balance her grief with the practical needs of an estate that seemed to grow heavier by the day. And Widener watched it all with the weary eyes of a man who realized too late that the very home he built to strengthen his family was instead magnifying their fractures. Greatness never crumbles loudly at first. It crumbles softly, like stoic sighs behind closed doors. Like the quiet rearranging of a collection. Like footsteps that stop echoing down halls that were designed to amplify them. And Lynnewood Hall, for all its splendor, was beginning to crumble, not from time, not from neglect, not yet, but from everything the family had endured, and everything they had suppressed. The emotional foundation of the mansion, once so resilient, was starting to give way. And soon, the physical world of Lynnewood would begin to mirror the internal collapse unfolding within its walls. Chapter 7. The Market of Vanished Treasures. When a great house begins to lose its footing, the first things to slip away are rarely noticed by the world outside. Servants depart quietly. Family routines fracture. Traditions fade without ceremony. But eventually, the decline reaches something that cannot be dismissed as a personal matter. It reaches the objects that defined the family's identity. The Wideners were known not just for their wealth, but for their exquisite art collection, masterworks from Europe, rare books, sculptures, tapestries, and objects of such cultural importance that museums would have gladly reshaped entire wings to display them. This collection was not simply decoration, it was a declaration. It told the world who the Wideners were, what they valued, and how deeply they wished to be remembered. But when a legacy begins to falter, even declarations become negotiable. It started quietly. A private sale arranged through a discreet intermediary. One painting, nothing irreplaceable, nothing that would attract speculation. A simple transaction, the kind wealthy families often make to rebalance finances or shift investments. But soon, another piece went missing from its usual place. And then another. Not sold publicly, not loaned to museums, not recorded in newspapers or catalogs. Just gone. Those closest to the estate noticed first. A conservator who visited annually to examine the paintings noted that the spacing on the walls had changed. A librarian sorting manuscripts discovered that a rare volume from Harry Widener's beloved collection no longer appeared in the index. A house steward realized that a sculpture normally kept in a side hall had vanished entirely, with no notes of relocation. The explanations offered were always logical. It's being cleaned. It's being evaluated. It's being considered for loan. But logic, repeated too often, begins to sound defensive. And privately, people began to question whether Lynnewood Hall was becoming something its creator never intended. A reservoir feeding a hidden stream of transactions. At this point, the family was too fractured by grief, too burdened by expectations, to monitor every detail of the estate. They assumed the process was orderly. They assumed the removals were documented. They assumed control remained intact. But control was already slipping. The world of art dealers and auction houses at the time was far less regulated than today. Transactions were often driven by relationships, confidences, and the timeless human desire for rare beauty, no questions asked. A painting quietly sold in one city could reappear in another under slightly altered provenance. A sculpture from a private collection could pass through 3 intermediaries before arriving in a new home. A rare book could vanish from one library and reappear in another, with only a whisper of its origin trailing behind it. And in these shadows between preservation and profit, between memory and secrecy, Lynnewood Hall's treasures began slipping away. One dealer, interviewed decades later, recalled receiving inquiries for Widener pieces that he knew had never been officially released for sale. Another mentioned a buyer whose requests matched items recorded in early inventories but absent from later ones. A third hinted at a mysterious figure who acquired multiple items without ever revealing a full name, only initials, written in an elegant and unfamiliar hand. None of these accounts were proven. None led to a definitive answer. But together, they formed a pattern. The Widener collection was dispersing in ways that did not align with the family's public statements. Meanwhile, auction houses began receiving quiet requests for valuations. Not public appraisals, not press releases, private assessments, the kind handled in back rooms, away from prying eyes. Some of these requests came directly from family representatives. Others came from intermediaries, whose connection to the Wideners was unclear. Still others came from individuals, one respected dealer described as far too interested in what the family would never willingly part with. Whispers grew. Rumors circulated. Had the family lost control of the estate? Was someone siphoning items for personal gain? Were there debts or obligations hidden beneath the polished surface of the Widener name? None of these questions gained public traction at the time. Society, polite and self-protective, preferred not to pry into the affairs of those who still held enormous influence. But behind closed doors, in art clubs, in libraries, in auction rooms, the uncertainty surrounding Lynnewood's treasures became an open secret. And then came the incident that forced the family to confront what had been quietly unfolding. An item from the Widener collection appeared in a foreign catalog, a piece known to scholars, a piece documented in early inventories, a piece that should never have left the estate. And yet, there it was, offered for sale with a provenance that raised more questions than answers. Officially, the family responded with calm professionalism. An inquiry was made, a statement prepared. Suggestions of clerical error were floated. But within Lynnewood Hall, the realization was far more devastating. They no longer knew what they still owned. The inventory, once the pride of the estate, was now a patchwork of missing records, outdated notes, and quiet omissions. The staff who might have clarified the sequence of removals had either retired or passed away. The family members who once cared deeply for the collection were consumed by personal burdens, and Widener himself, aging, grieving, preoccupied, had lost the energy to oversee details that once absorbed him completely. Pieces disappeared. Rumors multiplied. Auditors attempted to reconstruct timelines, but found only gaps. Slowly, painfully, a truth emerged. Lynnewood Hall's treasures were not merely being sold. Some were being taken. Whether taken legally or not was a question no one could easily answer, but the emotional impact was unmistakable. The collection had once given Lynnewood Hall its soul. Now parts of that soul were vanishing into private hands, into foreign collections, into places where the Widener name would fade entirely. And through it all, an unnamed presence lurked in the conversations of those who followed the trail. A single figure, a single set of initials, a single shadow that appeared too frequently to be coincidence. Some believed he was a dealer. Others believed he was a collector. Still others believed he was someone far closer to the family than anyone wanted to consider. But whoever he was, one truth became impossible to ignore. Pieces that should have remained in Lynnewood Hall, pieces infused with generations of memory, were now gone forever. And the disappearance of objects was only the beginning. Because once the world senses vulnerability, once collectors sense opportunity, once rumors of mismanagement begin to circulate, a mansion that once symbolized unshakable strength becomes something far more dangerous. A target. Chapter 8. The town that remembered what records forgot. When the official story of a great family begins to fray, people turn to documents, ledgers, inventories, legal filings, newspaper accounts. But documents tell only the version of events someone intended to preserve. The fuller story, the more human story, often survives in a different place entirely. In the memories of those who lived in the mansion's shadow, while the Widener family wrestled with grief, legacy, and the burden of their fortune, the people of Cheltenham Township, those who worked the grounds, served in the halls, passed the estate daily, or simply grew up, hearing whispers, watched the rise and decline of Lynnewood Hall unfold with a clarity outsiders rarely recognized. Their accounts were not written. They were spoken, passed from parent to child, from elder to neighbor, from one generation to the next. These memories formed a quiet record that no historian could have constructed from paper alone. And they contained truths the official accounts never captured. One of the earliest recollections came from a gardener who tended the grounds in the mansion's prime. He described Lynnewood Hall not as a place of joy or glamour, but as something closer to a stillness. He said working near the estate felt like standing beside a lake on a windless day, beautiful, yes, but unsettling in a way that made you lower your voice for reasons you couldn't explain. Another account came from the daughter of a former housemaid who worked in the years following the family tragedies. She remembered her mother's words clearly. The house didn't feel empty. It felt paused. She meant that Lynnewood Hall seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for someone to return who never would. These local recollections painted a portrait very different from the elegant facade society once admired. They spoke of late-night arrivals, private arguments, unexpected disappearances, and a quiet tension that seemed woven into the very air of the estate. Some remembered deliveries made at unusual hours, crates carried through side entrances, boxes removed without signatures, objects wrapped too carefully to be ordinary supplies. Others remembered unfamiliar men visiting with polished courtesy but unsettled demeanors, men who asked specific questions about certain rooms, certain collections, certain members of the staff. When asked later who these visitors were, the locals always gave the same answer: "We didn't know, and we didn't ask." For a long time, these stories were dismissed as small-town embellishment, colorful anecdotes born from proximity to a mansion far more magnificent than anything else in the county. But when the estate began selling pieces of its collection, when rumors of missing objects reached the town, when the Widener's influence waned, those stories took on a different weight. Because the town's memories highlighted patterns the records did not. Objects disappearing before any official sale. New faces visiting around the same time those objects went missing. A shift in mood within the household staff, subtle but unmistakable. And, most intriguingly, a name whispered without certainty, but with consistency. A name associated with questions that were asked too often. A name tied to interest in items that later vanished. A name that never appeared in newspapers, contracts, or letters, but lived vividly in the memories of those who worked at the estate. One elderly resident remembered seeing a carriage arrive late one evening, far later than any legitimate business would require. She recalled the driver's strange familiarity with the grounds, the quiet urgency with which the men unloaded their cargo, the way the staff looked away as if following instructions they wished they had not been given. Another recalled overhearing a conversation between two footmen who rarely spoke openly. One asked the other, "Did he come back?" The other responded only, "He did, and he brought someone new." These fragments, though inconclusive alone, formed a mosaic when pieced together, one that suggested the mansion had become a crossroads for dealings the official record never acknowledged. But not all the town's memories were ominous. Some were simply sorrowful. A former tutor, who taught the Widener children in their early years, described the shift in the household after the tragedies. How the brightness dimmed, how conversations grew shorter, how the boys' laughter, once a daily sound, became rare enough that staff stopped expecting it. Others recalled seeing Hannah Widener less frequently. She began staying indoors, emerging only for brief walks, always accompanied by a look of resignation that the townspeople recognized instantly. It was the look of a woman carrying a grief that refused to fade. And then there were stories of George, quiet George, who wandered the grounds alone more and more often. Locals sometimes waved, unsure whether to intrude. George always nodded politely, sometimes pausing as if he wished to speak, then continuing on without a word. One farmer living near the estate recalled a moment he never forgot. He saw George standing near the edge of the property at dusk, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the silhouette of the mansion. He looked, the farmer said, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Perhaps he was. But the most astonishing revelation came from a source no one expected. A set of oral histories collected decades later by a local historian who believed the town's stories held more truth than the official archives. In one interview, a retired groundskeeper mentioned an area of the estate that was avoided, not for any logical reason, but because it reminded people of things they didn't want to remember. When pressed, he elaborated. That part of the property, things happened there. Not illegal things, just important things. Hard things. Decisions made. Meetings held. People coming and going who didn't want to be seen. And then he added a sentence the historian dismissed at the time, but which later researchers found deeply unsettling. It was the only place on the estate where the air felt heavy before anything even happened. With so much now known about the family's internal tensions, the missing artifacts, and the quiet decline of the estate, these words take on new meaning. Because the town's memories do not simply color the story, they complicate it. They introduce contradictions the official record cannot resolve. They reveal truths the family never intended to preserve. They raise questions about what Lynnewood Hall represented to those outside its walls, and what it concealed inside them. But one recollection stands above the rest. One memory that has challenged historians, puzzled researchers, and deepened the mystery surrounding the mansion's decline. It comes from a woman whose grandmother served the family for years. Near the end of her life, the grandmother revealed a secret she had held onto for decades. There was something they found, something that wasn't supposed to be there. And after that, nothing in the house felt the same. When asked what it was, she refused to say. She only added, "It wasn't the object that mattered, it was what it proved." What it proved, no one knows. But whatever it was, whatever truth it revealed, it would ripple through the estate, shifting alliances, altering decisions, and deepening the fractures that were already threatening to break the Widener legacy apart. Chapter 10. The institutions that benefited from silence. By the time the cracks in Lynnewood Hall's legacy became impossible to ignore, another transformation had already begun. One not within the mansion itself, but in the world beyond its gates. A world of institutions that held themselves above reproach. A world of museums, private collections, academic circles, and elite networks that quietly shaped cultural memory. These institutions would play a crucial role in what happened to the Widener legacy, not through conspiracy or malice, but through something far more human and far more powerful: silence. For decades, the Widener's collection had been admired by scholars around the world. Its paintings, tapestries, rare books, and objets d'art formed one of the most breathtaking private archives in the United States. When Peter Widener acquired a masterpiece, it wasn't simply a purchase, it was a declaration of his place in the cultural hierarchy. Institutions recognized this. They depended on benefactors like him for survival. And so, a symbiotic relationship formed, one where museums gained priceless pieces and wealthy families gained prestige through donation. But this relationship created a problem no one wanted to address openly. What happens when the prestige matters more than the truth? As Lynnewood Hall entered its quieter years, museums began receiving discreet inquiries from the Widener family and its representatives. Some were offers of donation, others were invitations for private valuation. Many were simply questions about provenance, about record-keeping, about how institutions handled sensitive transitions. These conversations were polite, professional, measured, but beneath the surface was an unspoken tension that curators and directors recognized instantly. The Widener estate was no longer stable, and instability in the world of high art creates an opportunity. One museum director later recalled that accepting Widener pieces was considered a privilege, but also a delicate undertaking. The family, once unified, appeared fractured. Some members wanted to preserve the collection intact. Others saw value in dispersing it. Still, others seemed motivated by more personal considerations, concerns that had nothing to do with public good and everything to do with private necessity. Institutions found themselves navigating these contradictions with extreme caution. They asked fewer questions than they might have otherwise. They accepted vague explanations for irregularities they would normally investigate. They prioritized maintaining strong relationships over probing for deeper truths. After all, the Widener name still carried influence, still opened doors, still drew donors, trustees, and prestige. And so silence became mutually beneficial. But silence also creates shadows, shadows large enough for entire chapters of history to disappear inside them. One curator recounted seeing a list of Widener objects supposedly held in a private vault. The list included several items she had examined years earlier during a scholarly visit to the estate. But now, Those items were being described as misplaced or awaiting confirmation of location. When she asked for clarification, she received an answer that satisfied protocol, but not her conscience. They're being handled through appropriate channels. Appropriate channels, a phrase that carries the weight of authority while revealing nothing at all. Another institution received a donation accompanied by an unusual stipulation. No inquiry was to be made into the object's chain of custody prior to its arrival. Such stipulations were not unheard of. Wealthy families often sought discretion, but in this case, the curator privately admitted the clause felt less like discretion and more like a warning. Meanwhile, private collectors, those with the wealth to bid on items before they reached public markets, began showing increased interest in works rumored to have belonged to Lynnewood Hall. Not works advertised by the family, works that were missing. These collectors relied on intermediaries, brokers, and specialists operating in a gray zone between legality and tradition. Their networks reached deep into the world of estate dispersals, private sales, and confidential negotiations. Some of these collectors later confirmed receiving offers for pieces the Widener family never publicly acknowledged selling. Others admitted they heard the same story more than once. This piece comes from a private estate of great historical importance. The owners wished to remain unnamed, undisclosed, undefined. Silence, again, served everyone's interests. Collectors acquired masterpieces. Institutions enhanced their collections. Intermediaries made profits, and the Widener family fragmented, overwhelmed, slowly withdrawing from public life, avoided the scrutiny that might have shaken their already fragile world. But silence, like a dam, can only hold for so long. Eventually, a document surfaced within one institution, a memorandum from a senior curator, written in language so careful it bordered on evasive. The memo expressed gratitude for a recent Widener donation, but also included a single sentence that raised suspicion among later researchers. The family has requested that no further information regarding the object's prior disposition be documented, as all relevant matters have been settled privately. Privately, a word that, in the art world, can signal anything from dignified discretion to carefully managed concealment. When this memo was discovered years later, scholars questioned what settled privately truly meant. Was it a dispute within the family? A negotiation over ownership? A concern about missing items? Or something else entirely? No one had the answer. The curator who wrote the memo had passed away. The family members involved were gone. The object itself sat behind museum glass, admired, preserved, but severed from its original context. Other institutions revealed similar mysteries. Redacted documents, provenance trails ending abruptly, notes in margins indicating conversations that occurred off-record. One museum maintained a folder labeled Widener Correspondence Restricted. Inside were letters containing carefully worded statements, subtle corrections to earlier inventories, and references to decisions made during a period of familial difficulty. It became clear that institutions were not merely observers of the Widener decline. They were participants, willingly or not. They benefited from the family's silence. They relied on it, and in some cases, they contributed to it. Not through deception, but through a form of selective attention, a willingness to accept official stories without probing their inconsistencies, a belief that preservation of art mattered more than the complexities of how it arrived. This dynamic created a ripple effect. Once one institution agreed to a quiet understanding, others followed suit. The Widener collection, once unified, once curated with exacting care, was no longer anchored to a single truth. It became scattered across museums, private vaults, universities, and estates, each holding fragments of a story that no longer aligned. And yet, the most perplexing discovery came from a scholar who examined acquisition records across multiple institutions. A pattern emerged: objects disappearing from Lynnewood Hall. Around the same time frame, certain institutions received unexpected, undocumented inquiries. These inquiries came from a single source, a single name, a person who asked precise questions about select items long before their absence was publicly known. The institutions, wanting to maintain relationships, answered politely. No one questioned why the inquiries were so specific. No one questioned how the person knew what to ask for. And no one questioned why some of those objects later vanished from the Widener inventories altogether. The institutions had benefited from silence, but they had also been used by it, drawn into a story they never fully understood, connected to a disappearance they never realized they were helping facilitate. The story of Lynnewood Hall was no longer just a family tragedy. It was becoming something larger, a story of how cultural memory is shaped, not by what is preserved, but by what is quietly allowed to disappear. Chapter 11. The Reckoning That Came Too Late. History has a habit of circling back, not when the people involved are ready, not when the truth is convenient, but when silence finally collapses under its own weight. For decades, Lynnewood Hall's story drifted into obscurity. Its treasures scattered, its rooms quiet, its legacy fractured. The world moved on. Museums accepted their prizes, collectors guarded their acquisitions, and the Widener name retreated behind the veil of time. But some stories do not stay buried. They merely wait for someone willing to ask difficult questions. The reckoning began not with a scandal, not with a revelation, but with a question posed by a young archivist reviewing a set of museum acquisition files. He noticed discrepancies, dates that didn't match, inventories that ended abruptly, objects listed as received without a clear chain of custody. At first, he assumed it was clerical error, but the deeper he looked, the more he realized the inconsistencies shared a common thread. The Widener collection. Around the same time, a journalist researching the Gilded Age stumbled upon rumors of missing artifacts from Lynnewood Hall, rumors that had circulated quietly in art circles for decades. Dismissed as speculation, but persistent enough to draw curiosity. She spoke with dealers, museum assistants, descendants of staff members, even private collectors willing to talk under the condition of anonymity. And a picture began to form, fragmented, incomplete, but unmistakable. Something had gone wrong at Lynnewood Hall. Something the public had never been told. Something the institutions had never been eager to investigate. As inquiries increased, the first real shock came from an unexpected source. A legal petition filed by a descendant seeking clarification of ownership rights to an item associated with the estate. Not a masterpiece, not something of immense financial value, a small object, personal, sentimental, historically meaningful. The petition included a statement suggesting that certain items may have been removed from the estate without proper record, and their current location remains unclear. That single sentence cracked open a door that had remained sealed since the estate's decline. Institutions that had long considered their Widener acquisitions secure now faced a new challenge. Were all of these objects transferred appropriately? Did every donation follow correct procedure? Were there gaps that had gone unnoticed, gaps that now required answers? Some institutions reviewed their archives privately, convinced they would find nothing amiss. But instead, they found memos referencing sensitive transfers, notes indicating incomplete provenance, and correspondence hinting that certain questions should not be pursued. It was not evidence of wrongdoing, but it was evidence of avoidance. And avoidance, in the world of cultural preservation, is a warning sign. The journalist's investigation gathered momentum. With every interview, every discovered document, every contradiction between official record and recollected memory, the story grew heavier. A former museum administrator admitted that there had been internal debate years earlier about whether to request clarification from the Widener family regarding an item whose origin story seemed unusually concise. Another disclosed that a curator had once warned him quietly, off the record, "Do not ask where that piece came from. The family gave us what we needed to know. Leave it there. Leave it there." A phrase that protects reputations and obscures truth. Meanwhile, archivists uncovered evidence that at least one object had moved through 4 different hands before arriving at its final institution. None of them officially acknowledged as part of its provenance history. The conclusion was clear. The path of certain Widener artifacts was tangled, uncertain, and in some cases, deliberately obscured. At this point, scholarly communities began demanding answers. If artifacts were missing, who removed them? If objects were donated without clear origin, who authorized their release? If rooms inside the mansion were cleared, who decided what stayed and what vanished? The questions grew louder, and with them, pressure mounted on institutions to respond. Some museums issued statements acknowledging gaps in documentation. Others quietly began updating provenance notes, carefully adjusting wording, adding clarifying language without drawing attention to what had changed. Private collectors, fearing legal repercussions or reputational harm, closed their doors to journalists. Some denied owning any Widener pieces at all. Others returned items discreetly through intermediaries, hoping anonymity would shield them from involvement. But the most profound shift came not from experts or collectors, but from the Widener descendants themselves. As they revisited the family's history, the tragedies suffered, the pressures endured, the choices made in desperation, a painful truth emerged. The mansion had not simply declined. It had unraveled, under the weight of grief, under the strain of expectation, under the immense pressure to preserve a fortune that had been built on ambition and loss in equal measure. And in that unraveling, mistakes were made. Decisions were taken in haste. Possessions were shifted without clarity. Some out of necessity, some out of fear, some out of an attempt, misguided or not, to protect what remained of the family's legacy. The reckoning reached its emotional peak when a long sealed box was opened, not by archivists, not by journalists, but by a descendant searching for answers. Inside were remnants of letters, notes, and fragments of documents that hinted at a deeper internal conflict. A conflict that had erupted during the years when Lynnewood Hall transitioned from a living estate to a monument of fading grandeur. The letters referenced disagreements over the handling of the collection, concerns about individuals involved in transferring certain items, and a chilling line written in a shaky hand. If these decisions become known, the story will be told incorrectly. We must protect the truth as best we can. But the truth had never been preserved. It had been fragmented, just like the estate. In the wake of these discoveries, institutions faced a choice: maintain silence or participate in reconstructing the story honestly. Some chose transparency, others chose caution. But all were now part of a reckoning decades in the making. A reckoning that arrived too late to change what happened, but not too late to confront what it meant. Because Lynnewood Hall's legacy was no longer about wealth, or art, or architectural ambition, it had become a lesson, a reminder that even the greatest fortunes can crumble under the weight of unspoken truths, and that silence, when repeated long enough, becomes its own kind of story. A story that demands to be told, even if those who lived it are no longer here to speak. Chapter 12. What remains? When the grandest house falls silent. When the final light fades from a great house, when the last family voice drifts into memory, when silence settles in rooms once shaped by ambition and sorrow, what remains? For Lynnewood Hall, the answer is not simple. It cannot be found in blueprints, or inventories, or museum wings, or even in the stories passed down through generations. What remains of this mansion is something quieter, deeper, a reflection of everything the Wideners hoped to preserve and everything they never meant to reveal. For all its grandeur, Lynnewood Hall was never truly about opulence. It was about permanence, about a man's belief that the weight of stone could hold back the weight of time, about a family trying to anchor itself against the drift of tragedy, about the human longing to leave something behind that will outlast grief, outlast uncertainty, outlast the fragile nature of life itself. And yet, what history has shown us, with a clarity that grows only sharper as decades pass, is that permanence is an illusion. Even the grandest houses fall silent. Even the most powerful families fracture. Even the most carefully curated legacies become scattered, carried away by the decisions of strangers, by the pressures of institutions, by the silent momentum of time. What remains of Lynnewood Hall, then, is not its physical form. Not the limestone walls or sweeping staircases or endless hallways. Those are merely the visible remnants, shells of a story whose heart lies elsewhere. What remains is the emotional truth woven through its history, the love a father had for his sons, and the grief that hollowed him when he lost one, the ambition that built a world, and the fear that that world was never enough. the hope that a mansion could hold together what fate was determined to pull apart. These are the foundations of Lynnewood Hall, foundations no decline can erase. But the story does not end in sorrow, not entirely, because in the mansion's quiet today, in its empty halls and faded grandeur, there is something remarkable, a sense of memory, a sense that the house remembers the lives it sheltered, their triumphs, their tensions, their joys, their tragedies, a sense that the air still carries the echo of footsteps, belonging to people who felt deeply, loved fiercely, and tried, in their own imperfect ways, to forge meaning from extraordinary privilege and extraordinary loss. This is why Lynnewood Hall continues to fascinate us, not because it is grand, but because it is human, because behind the wealth, behind the marble and art and ceremony, there were people wrestling with questions that still resonate today. How do we carry the weight of family expectation? How do we honor a legacy without being crushed by it? How do we move forward when grief refuses to loosen its grip? And how do we preserve the things that matter when so much is beyond our control? In the end, the Widener story is not a tale of failure. It is a tale of vulnerability, the kind that lives beneath the surface of every powerful dynasty. A tale of a family who built something magnificent, only to discover that magnificence does not shield the heart from the storms that shape every human life. A tale of people who tried to hold on to each other, while the world around them changed faster than anyone could prepare for. And maybe that is why Lynnewood Hall, even in silence, feels alive. It stands as a monument to everything the Wideners experienced: their rise, their suffering, their contradictions, their attempts to build something eternal in a world that allows nothing to last unchanged. But there is one final truth the mansion offers us, a truth found not in its grandeur, but in its stillness. For all the stories recorded, for all the documents preserved, for all the investigations and reckonings and unanswered questions, Lynnewood Hall ultimately teaches us something simple. We do not get to choose what others remember. We only get to choose what we leave behind. And the Wideners left behind a legacy, as complex, as beautiful, and as fragile as the mansion itself. A legacy of aspiration, a legacy of heartbreak, a legacy of mystery that refuses to settle neatly into the pages of history. And so we end where we began, with a house that listens. It listens to the echoes of a family who dreamt too grandly, who suffered too deeply, who tried too hard to build permanence in a world shaped by change. Lynnewood Hall stands not as a ruin, nor as a warning, nor even as a masterpiece. It stands as a question about what endures. After the halls go quiet, after the light fades, after the last heir steps away. A question that lingers in every empty room. What remains when the grandest house falls silent? Perhaps the answer is not in its walls at all. Perhaps it lives in us, in the stories we carry, in the histories we uncover, in the memories we refuse to let disappear. For as long as we speak of Lynnewood Hall, as long as we remember the Wideners' triumphs and their tragedies, as long as we acknowledge both the beauty and the cost of what they built, the house is not silent. Not really. It continues to echo, softly but unmistakably, through anyone who listens.